Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
So, to start off, why don't we do introductions and short 2-minute opening statements from the two of you, and let's start with you, Jérôme, as you're closest to me.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm very glad to be there. I think it's a very important thing we are going to discuss because, as you said in your introduction, the Energy Charter Treaty was designed in the 90s, and the thinking behind that was that we needed more investment in energy, which indeed we still need, especially in the eastern part of Europe. But what we have seen in the practice is that this treaty has become, we have encountered some member states have encountered many difficulties with the application of the treaty, especially to the transition. And when changing the energy policy, you could be challenged by investors wanting to protect, if I may say so, the investment. And we saw that it was not really fit for purpose for the energy transition. And then we had a very interesting debate. I was not there, but some of my colleagues did, with Yamina, but what was the best way to go forward? Was it to reform the treaty? Was it to go out? Was it to go out alone, as at the end of the day we decided to do, or to withdraw as the EU, as you said, is still pending, this decision is still pending. So I think we really shared the same objectives. We just had different views about how to achieve this objective of changing this treaty that was an hindrance for the transition.
Great. Well, I'm sure we'll come into some of those differences of opinion shortly. Yamina?
Yeah, I am delighted to be here again, speaking about the Energy Charter Treaty. Last year, I was here and talking about the Energy Charter Treaty, which was unknown for most of the people. And last year, my country, France, was still party to this treaty because we were waiting for the final modernization text, because there was a hope among the governments to be able to modernize this treaty. They did not consider my conclusion in 2018 that we cannot modernize this treaty from climate perspective. But then I was delighted when my government announced finally that France is withdrawing from this treaty. And France is among the countries who have effectively withdrawn, because we have already sent a notification of withdrawal in December. So this means that by December 2023, France is no longer party to this treaty. However, as a member state, we are party to this treaty twice, as a member state, as a country, but also as the EU. And this is why we need to have the withdrawal of the EU as a whole, because we need to have this coordinated withdrawal for one important reason, at least one, because after you withdraw by December 2023, in the case of France, this will unleash the sunset clause, which means that all the investment made before December 2023 in France will remain protected for 20 years more.
Right.
And most of these investment are, in case of foreign investment, are investment in fossil fuels, where it is during this time where we need to decarbonize. But if we have an EU withdrawal, then we can agree between ourselves, because then we are no longer under the Energy Charter Treaty. We will be only under the EU treaty that governs us. And under the EU treaty that governs us as Europeans, we can agree between ourselves to cancel the sunset clause between EU countries. Why is it important? Because when I looked to what is considered as foreign investment and protected by this treaty, more than 60% at the EU level, I don't know, I don't have in mind the details for France, are intra-EU investment. Intra-EU investment are already governed by the EU treaty, so we don't need additional treaty. And that's why we need the EU withdrawal, and the earlier the EU withdrawal takes place, because you see, after the notification, you wait 1 year to have effective withdrawal. The earlier this happened, the better it is for us, then we unlock ourselves from this outdated treaty.
Sure.
So I'm here today, I'm happy to have Jérôme from Foreign Affairs to call again on my government, and especially on foreign affairs, to take the actions that are required to push for the EU withdrawal now, before the end of the Swedish presidency in June.
Great. So before we get further into the detail of it, just for the benefit of anyone in the audience that doesn't know, could you explain what is the Energy Charter Treaty and what is so problematic about it, and why we are calling for either withdrawal or reform?
Yeah. So the Energy Charter Treaty is a trade agreement that was put in place by EU countries after the collapse of the Soviet Union in the 90s. At that time, the EU was only 15 countries, not the EU we know today. This treaty was designed to protect foreign investment in the energy sector, and it was mainly in energy supply, only in energy supply. And at that time, energy supply was 100% fossil fuel supply, to protect this investment by means of private arbitration. Why? Because with the collapse of the Soviet Union, these new republics that did emerge from the Soviet Union did not have a strong justice system, and the private arbitration, in theory, allows to compensate for that. So this treaty has been first used to protect our investments, so investment of our companies in Eastern European countries. Some of these countries have joined the EU. They are now part of the EU. They are mainly transit countries. They don't have, they are not energy supply, but they are transit countries. It protects also transit. But then, over time, this treaty became a barrier, became used, because at the beginning, the first investor-state dispute settlements using this treaty were from Western countries, Western companies against Eastern countries. But then, over time, investors starting using this treaty against EU countries, because one simple use of this treaty is, for example, as a government, you could decide to put in place subsidies to attract, to start to unleash new market of whatever this market is. And then over time, of course, if there is no need for subsidies, you will cut or completely remove the subsidies. This is what happened for renewables, for example, subsidies. And they started suing, and the first two countries that faced this were Spain and Portugal. So their governments have two options. The Spanish option is that they decided to not negotiate with investors. They decided they are the government, it's their duty to put in place the right policies. The Portuguese government, it's not known, but the Portuguese government had a different strategy. They decided to negotiate with the investors. So they extended for them the subsidies until 2035. And this is how, in the case of the Spanish case, it's the country with the highest number of ISDS claims from investors against the Spanish government. And they are asking the Spanish government, or in reality, Spanish citizen, to pay for billions of euros of compensation. In the case of Portugal, what happened is that there have been no cases, but given that they negotiated an extension of the subsidy, so the electricity production from wind in Portugal has been until recently one of the most expensive one because of this. So you see, either way, you are locked in. And whatever you change in your energy policies, investors can use this treaty to sue you. So for example, France has been sued just recently for changes, again, in subsidies in for wind electricity production from wind power. And the other thing is that basically today, given that we have an EU neutrality, climate neutrality target, this means that in the EU, we must start phasing out fossil fuels. And it's already happening. For example, in Netherlands, they have been sued because of an early phase out of coal power plants. But we will all have to do that in all EU countries, because there is no other way to reach climate neutrality target. And this means that each time, and we know it from the Netherlands, from all other countries, that each time any of our countries will decide to work on the climate neutrality target, we will be sued, and we have to pay billions of euros to investors. And that's why it became a real barrier to climate policies. That was not thought like that. That was not at all imagined like that in the past. But then it became a tool against climate policies, and that's why several EU countries, and the biggest ones, most of the big EU countries, have already withdrawn from the treaty.
Great, thank you for that introduction. Jérôme, what's the French policy? Why have you decided to unilaterally withdraw? And are you calling as well on the Commission, on Brussels, to lead a collective withdrawal?
Yes. So I think the first time when Yamina and others warned about the effects of the treaty, we thought we could find a solution by modernizing the treaty. So we engaged in in a very quite long negotiation within the framework of the treaty to modernize it. The idea behind that was that, as Yamina said, there is this sunset clause for 20 years, and we thought maybe it's better to try to modernize it and exclude fossil fuels from the treaty from now on and for all investment in order to avoid the effect of the sunset clause. So it was a very difficult negotiation, which I think is a very good example that climate neutrality is not that obvious today, because some member states of the European Charter Treaty couldn't accept, for example, that an exemption of fossil fuels and everything that we were asking for. So it really shows that we are, when trying to transition towards climate neutrality, we are encountering some resistance from some member states, some non-European member states. So we saw at the end, I think it was in October, that what we had tried to achieve with the modernization was just not possible. Mm-hmm. And at that time, there was sort of a coordination, but not that much, between member states, and 6 of them decided to go public and say we will withdraw from the treaty unilaterally on a national basis. So, as Yamina said, Spain, Netherlands, Luxembourg, France, Germany. So we all decided to do that, Poland also. But then it depends of your constitution, and some have to go in front of the parliament. It was not our case. So it can take more or less time to withdraw from the treaty. And now, indeed, as you said, the next step is really for the EU to withdraw from the treaty, because we are in quite not funny, because it's not funny, awkward situation where the Commission now really knows that she can't have a mandate for the modernization of the treaty. And I think some members of the Commission, especially at technical level, really hope that they will have such a mandate to accept the modernization of the treaty. But now it's very clear it won't be the case, because you don't have a majority in the Council, and the European Parliament has been very clear that it can't accept the modernization. So logically, the next step is for the EU to withdraw as a whole. But it's how to say that?
What are the barriers to that? What are the barriers to?
I think it's more technicalities, and we just need a strong political will from the Commission to withdraw the EU as a whole from the treaty.
Okay. And Yamina, you want to see withdrawal announced in this presidency now, so in the next month?
Yeah, because actually we already have Frans Timmermans, who is the Vice President at the European Commission for Climate, who already made it clear that the only way forward for us is to withdraw the overall EU. But then we are in a situation of lock-in situation, and that's why we need the French government to intervene to make it clear that the withdrawal should occur now, because the earlier we withdraw, the earlier the EU sends a notification, the better for us. Then we can start working between ourselves on this agreement, an EU agreement only, to cancel the sunset clause. And then we are out and we can start working on climate neutrality, because all this is time wasted for climate neutrality target. And that's why, once again, I call on my government through Jérôme to take action vis-à-vis of the Commission to ensure that the Commission will speed up the withdrawal of the EU.
What's your response to that, Jérôme? Are you going to take that message back to your government?
No, but we are already acting, and we are, Laurence Boone, my minister, is encountering very often the Commissioner, and making the point to them that we really need to withdraw as a whole, as a EU, and that we shouldn't be lost in technicalities, and that we have, as a Minister for Energy, will meet at the end of June, and I think it will be the right time for them to take a decision, because we can't wait, as you said.
I want to. I don't want us to get lost in technicalities either, but I want to just ask about this sunset clause, Yamina, and your suggestion that only through European action can we avoid governments getting caught up in this sunset clause. How would that work?
So the ideal case is that all other EU countries would withdraw. I do think that by having the withdrawal of the EU, they will withdraw as well. And then this means that EU countries, we already had an agreement, similar agreement between EU countries to cancel all the clauses of bilateral treaties. Because in the past, we had bilateral treaties between EU countries, especially with those who joined later on. So it's exactly the same kind of agreement that we need, because then this means that we have to avoid to have EU investors moving to another EU country to sue their countries. So for example, Spain has been sued by Spanish investors from Luxembourg. You see? So this is what we have to avoid. And that's why we need this EU withdrawal with an agreement between EU countries. So this is how we limit the cost. This is the least cost option that we have. And this is why we need, there are some technical legal issues to be sorted out. I'm not expert on these things. But the most important point is that the legal services of the Council and the legal services of the Commission must look at to all these technicalities and speed up the process. Jérôme was mentioning the next Energy Council meeting in June. I hope the French government will put pressure to have it in the agenda. It's not yet in the agenda, to have the withdrawal of the EU from the treaty. And then we are out, and then we can work out the legal services of the Commission and the Council can work out on this agreement. But it's not the first time that we had this kind of agreement between EU countries.
And what would be the consequence of that not being done? What would be the consequence of that not being put on the agenda and that not being announced in this Swedish presidency and the continuation of the ECT? What would that mean? So
the more you delay, the more we are locked in protected fossil fuels. Or if you want, I am used to call this, it's not treaty to protect energy investment, it's treaty to protect greenhouse gas emissions. This is what this treaty is about. So can we, as Europeans, lead the climate debate at international level when we are locked in, when we are protecting, we are party to a treaty that protects greenhouse gas emissions? This is not possible. It's no longer possible for us. So that's why, once again, I call on my government through Jérôme to speed up to make sure that it is in the agenda of the next energy ministers meeting in June, to have the EU withdrawal, acted decision on the EU withdrawal, and then the rest is just technicalities, and you leave this to the services to do it. They are very good on that.
Jérôme, I doubt we're going to get a firm commitment from you, but is it going to be on that Energy Council agenda?
It's up to the presidency also, because we are pushing, but at the end of the day, the decision is for the presidency. We have been through that last year, and we know how difficult it is to run a council presidency, and Sweden has a lot to achieve during this energy council, but we really think it's possible. We just have, yes, we think we should devote some time on that issue at the minister level, because when you let this issue in working parties, it's really sometimes the debate is lost in technicalities, and you don't have the real political debate about what we want to achieve. And so that's why we think it's important to have that at the political level.
May I add one point? The decision to withdraw or to stay is political decision. It's not technical decision. How to make it happen is technical decision. The problem we have, the challenge we have, is that the debate for the EU withdrawal, to my knowledge, but Jérôme can correct that, has never been debated from political perspective. So we have been lost since the announcement of the withdrawal of France, Germany, since last year. So almost 6 months. We have been lost in technicalities, while it's political decision. When France decided to withdraw, it was political decision. Again, the same in all countries that did withdraw. So that's why I call again on my government, because it's political decision that our government should bring. It's really at Emmanuel Macron level, actually. He must call his partners, tell them that it's time to withdraw, and then we stop playing with these technical issues, because otherwise, for the technicalities, you will all have, you know, these technical experts. I am technical expert in my field, so we will never agree on all the details, never. But this is political decision.
Yeah. So you want to build on that momentum from the last 8 months of the member states unilaterally withdrawing to take that momentum into a Brussels-wide conversation. So I'm getting the feeling from both of you that a full exit is inevitable. It's just a question of when that actually happens. Okay. Yeah, please.
No, I really think we don't have any choice. And And I think it was very important that the European Parliament put pressure on the Commission, because we as member states can put some pressure on the Commission, but I think it's really important, and I really believe, especially because I'm representing the Secretary of State for Europe, but I'm a firm believer in the power of the European Parliament, and I think it was really important that the European Parliament came up and say, okay, now you have to act, you have to take a decision, new Commission, because sometimes the Commission listens more to the European Parliament than to member states, and it's good so. So I think it will also increase the pressure on the Commission to act now.